we're still early days of EV. We're still early days of gigafactories. We're still early days of recycling the EVs at the end. And if you can identify the cells in the battery pack at the end that could be saved or recycled, I think there's going to be a huge opportunity in terms of understanding the data.
Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Richard Barlow. Richard is the CEO of Wejo, a connected vehicle data company. Wejo is a publicly traded company on NASDAQ. It trades under WEJO. Wejo connects and analyzes billions of points a day of millions of cars all over the world. Richard, welcome to World of DaaS.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Excited for you to be here. Now, Wejo is a vehicle data company. It processes about 18 billion points per day. Where does like this is it basically coming from? Like, are you working with these OEMs and taking like the basic braking data and GPS data and I don't know, the tire data? Like, what data are you bringing in?
Yeah, so exactly that. So we work with 31 OEMs and tier one partners and fleet operators. We are forecast to have over 27 million vehicles live on platform this year. And we have access to a broad array of sensor data. It depends on the motor manufacturer, then they're called OEMs. It depends on the make and model as to what sort of access to data we have. But typically, we have a base case of data which is in near real time, so a sub-millisecond, a sub-second latency, and that base case tends to include live location with consent of the driver. Will include braking data, as you say. And another sort of expected sort of data outputs from the vehicle. But then with other motor manufacturers, we have access to up to 200 sensors. So we know battery status, we know powertrain performance, we know weather, really rich granular data, and it's all in this near real-time environment as well. So as you say, we receive over 18 billion data points a day. At peak, we receive over 500,000 data points a second. And we real-time process that data. The data in a
and I assume you're getting the data is like relatively small in terms of bytes, like because it's like it's bandwidth constraints. It's basically text data. You're not getting like visuals or sound or other types of things.
Yeah,
okay.
No, we are.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Okay. So we also get ADAS data as well. So I mean, so we processed I think the last public number was 26 petabytes of data. So it usually is some form of hex or hash or text, 7-bit in output. But we're now also receiving live video imagery data as well from vehicles. But usually on balance, it's a 7-bit, it's hash and hex, and that is the location GPS or the odo reading or the braking pressures.
And if the vehicle's in a place where it like doesn't have good cell connection, does it just batch it up and send it to you later or something? Or?
Yeah, exactly that. Depends on the motor manufacturer. So some will then send you the moment the vehicle gets back signal. There's one example I can think of where they do a batch upload every week of what wasn't sent in real time. So they keep batching up in vehicle, keep storing it, and then once a week, when the vehicle's static and has a reliable connectivity, then it'll send the balance of any data that's not already been sent. There is no standards in industry, and that's one of the reasons I started Wejo was there's no standards. There's no standards amongst the tier 1, tier 2 supply chain. There's no standards with the OEMs. Even the OEMs, they may not have a standard within their own make and models. So we take all this unsorted data, this data that's is fundamentally different depending on the motor manufacturer, and we sort it and we apply something called a common data model. But it starts with this raw data being on the network of the vehicle, being sent via a modem to either via the OEM's cloud or direct to our cloud, and then we start sorting this data.
Got it. And I assume just the way it is, it's like the OEMs are kind of partners where you like rev share back to them. I assume that's the way, or like that's where an outsider. How does it, like what's the benefit to them to participating?
So we have two sides to our business. So we have a marketplace business, and as you say, we typically rev share back to the OEMs on aggregates or anonymized use cases of data. And we disclose our unit economics or our vehicle billings of the value of data in those industries. So we do take from multiple OEMs live location, to identify real-time congestion, real-time collisions, and to improve safety on roads. And we show the outputs of those data to the likes of Microsoft and to departments of transport on an anonymized basis. In that environment, we typically rev share 60% of gross receivables back to the OEM. But then on the other side of the business, and we're doing more and more of this, the OEMs are outsourcing their data management, their data cloud to us, where they
so the OEMs are a customer as well, essentially. Yeah.
So they pay us to run an environment with one of the established cloud providers, and the OEMs will do that because they're leveraging our core expertise, the real time processing of data, to say identify live part failures in vehicle, which can then fundamentally affect the forecast warranty claims. So that's an example of a use case where the value play to the OEM is actually for them to fundamentally better manufacture vehicles. So there's two sides of business, both what we call solutions and marketplace.
One of the advantages a company like Tesla touts is that they have great data and that they're good at collecting data and that they have really good sensors. And so they use the network of the other Teslas to help them create that data. And that could help them maybe create a better autonomous vehicle or something like that. I assume that's a similar thing that you're touting. Okay, maybe you don't have the same expertise as Tesla OEM X, but we could help you do that, and together you could build a great autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, so we call it democratizing access to connected vehicle data. All the OEMs would like to have live access to data. When we're having access to 27 million live vehicles, where we see 6%, near enough 6% of all vehicle movements in New York, as an example of the amount of data we're receiving, that's hugely valuable. And aggregating that data together, building a synthetic data outcome where we can then share insights back to industry, so OEMs can fundamentally improve their cars, is a hugely valuable marketplace.
And to me, it does say it's a good start of a data co-op where you have a few dozen OEMs, every time you add an OEM, it becomes more valuable for everybody in the data co-op. But these data co-ops are really hard to get started. Getting the first guy on there, I imagine, is really how's the chicken and egg work if you're giving advice to another data company starting another market?
Yeah, I mean, so it took us. I started Wejo in 2013, 14, and it took 4 years to get any sort of traction with any OEM. And to start with, I raised capital, built a platform on what I thought data might look like, and then it was classic business development. You needed to put yourself in front of the OEMs and show them as to what a platform could do. And we won investment from General Motors in 2018, and that became a great sort of catalyst for us then winning contracts with various other OEMs in Detroit, and then further afield. We've got a huge presence now in the APAC regions, including Japan. We've won contracts in Europe. It started our catalyst moment was winning the GM contract and their investment, and the huge amount of data, and we showed them our platform worked, and we proved some of the business cases. It helped that my previous experience was I built a data platform in the fintech industry that did very well, and I proved that I could build a platform to drive value of data, and I took that same sort of use cases and applied it in the automotive sector. So in terms of that, presented some hope value to OEMs that I'd done it before.
Yeah.
And then we proved the platform worked. And then suddenly we were going from, in 2014, I was looking at some numbers the other day. We processed something like 2 million miles of data in the first year. We do that every second now. To give you an example of our scale of data.
So the types of things I could see understanding are just patterns of life, economic development, understanding traffic, understanding safety, understanding if I was building infrastructure, so if I'm a city or county, what are some of the other maybe less obvious things that folks would want to do with your data?
So one of our best known clients is Purdue University, and they've done like 17 or more use cases with our data, and they report that before we came along, it'd take them 2 to 3 years to analyze the data and to identify use cases, whereas they can now run similar reports in less than an hour. And what we're finding is that by providing a live stream of data, providing a sandbox where departments of transport, where city planners, where retail planners can run live queries and then actually simulate differing outcomes. So, for example, we know the wait time of every drive-through. We can tell you that now. And that's never been done before.
Yeah.
And generally knowing real-time data movements, not just on major highways, but on 95% of roads in the US. As one example, the use cases have become really interesting. Say retail has become a big growth area for us this year, where retailers want to know where to build their next store, for example.
That's super cool. That's really, really cool. And the newer the car, the more amazing the suite of sensors that are on that car. And so, if you had a car from 20 years ago, it may not have many of the sensors that would be as valuable, but like a new car right off the lot today is going to, what are the sensors that you're like really excited about that maybe aren't even going to come in for another few years?
Well, we've just completed some work with Hella Gutman, and
for our audience, what's Hella Gutman?
They are a tier 1 supplier, that's a tier 1 manufacturer. So they manufacture sensors, including ABS sensors, lights for vehicles, and one of their sensors is to identify a vehicle aquaplaning, so the wheels stop moving on the vehicle.
Ooh, it's so the vehicle's moving, but the wheels aren't.
Yeah. And we repurposed the data outcome. So we identified different use cases from that same sensor. So rather than that sensor identifying aquaplaning, what else could that sensor do by being placed in, say, the wheel arch of the vehicle? So, and the point really is that the opportunities, the use case of the data are almost unlimited if you can get access to the raw data of the sensor. And there's thousands of sensors in vehicle.
Yep.
I think a big growth area right now is that we're still early days of EV. We're still early days of gigafactories.
Yep. We're
still early days of recycling the EVs at the end, and if you can identify the cells in the battery pack at the end that could be saved or recycled, I think there's going to be a huge opportunity in terms of understanding the data, but the data coming from these cells at the moment is almost too much. So I think there's huge opportunities there. I think ADAS, the data out of ADAS, the data out
what's an ADAS?
Ultrasonic sensors in vehicles, radar in vehicles. There's a whole sort of suite. But ADAS fundamentally is a safety system, so it can identify, say, someone walking across the road.
Okay, got it. So it's like when your car beeps because you're moving in the wrong lane and something like that.
Or reading a traffic light or reading a speed sign. So there's a collection of sensors that are classed as ADAS. I think the use case of ADAS are very nascent at the moment. They've been used for certain use cases, but I think the repurposing of that data is a big opportunity. I think the idea of, you said earlier before, the idea of a cooperative of OEMs sharing their data with each other is a big push for us. And we think that's the only way that you're actually going to get mass market autonomous vehicles is if there's a cooperative data. So the OEMs don't have to, at the moment, they have to systematically deploy their own AVs in a new city and then learn that city. And then there's a slow deployment to another city, and there's a huge CapEx implication from that. There's different ways of doing that. And the funny thing is that the conventional vehicles already out there are already collecting a huge amount of data that could satisfy a lot of the story of getting AVs deployed quicker.
And like the new, I know like Apple CarPlay, they're trying to build like the sensors into the CarPlay itself so that you could see your tire pressure gauge within CarPlay. And so like, how do you think the future of these like dashboards are going to look like?
I think there's going to be friction between whether it's Android Auto or whether it's Apple CarPlay. There's going to be friction between the motor manufacturers being happy sharing that data. They don't need to share that data to the HMI, the human. It's called a human machine interface, the HMI of the vehicle that tends to display CarPlay or display Android Auto. I think that's got to be resolved. So in the extreme examples, yeah, sure, CarPlay's got broad access to potential sensors. Most OEMs are not going to want to embrace that idea. They're going to want to they're going to want to control the data, especially with Apple as their example. They've got their own potential automotive output in the future.
Right. They could end up being a competitor or something like that.
Yeah.
How do different jurisdictions deal with like how the data is regulated? Whether it's the US or the UK or Japan or EU, like how do they think about this data, and do you have to do different things based on the jurisdiction that you're in?
Yeah, so when we started, 9 years ago, we applied sort of what we call GDPR standards, which is the European standard for protecting data, and we applied that globally. But it's got more complicated now. So now there's the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. And that's going state by state. It may well go federal. In Japan, there's a different approach to data. So how we operate is that we operate single-tenanted environments per territory. So we can apply different rule sets, different sort of compliance approaches to regulation, depending on where the vehicle's located, depending on where the data needs to be sent to. Because it's not just where the vehicle's located. You've got to consider about the use case of the data. So if you're taking data in from one state, but the data needs to be delivered in another state, then you've got different considerations than staying within state.
Yeah, how does that work? Because like somebody might be driving from France to Germany, somebody might be driving from Texas to Oklahoma. They may live in one versus the other. They may be renting car versus owning the car versus like. How does one think about all those different jurisdictional things?
Well, we have so let's try again. We have over 900 documented procedures about how we protect data. We receive data from vehicles that are driving into Canada and back. There's a different rule set applied for there. So we offer what we call a regulatory wrapper to OEMs, where it's our responsibility to protect the integrity of the data, to protect the compliance of the data, and to make sure there are no breaches. There's in the US, it's not just the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, you've got to worry about. You've got to worry about the Right to Repair Act as a future sort of potential risk. So the idea of having a fingerprint of how the data is being created, how the data has been curated, how it's been being delivered, and be able to report back if you're challenged, and be able to prove the consent throughout the process is very important. And one of the things we've offered to OEMs is a consent-based platform, and we did announce that we are running a consent platform for one OEM in the US market where we provide all those protections.
And how do you think how do you think the idea of these autonomous vehicles are going to evolve over time? Like, is it going to be either certain jurisdictions that start, or is it going to be certain types of vehicles? Like, I don't know, they're going to be autonomous buses but not autonomous like personal vehicles, or how do you think, how should we expect that to evolve over time?
I think it's going to be slow. I think there is investment now in most states. There's departments in most states for AVs, but until there's some established standards, until there's a way of the established AV providers have a cooperative approach to working, which they don't do at the moment, then it's going to be quite stilted as to the actual overall deployment. It'll be resolved. It needs to be resolved with some standards. It needs to be resolved by the regulators, but because otherwise, the OEMs are fairly predictable now about where they're deploying OEM, where they're deploying their AVs. They're deploying them in California. They're deploying them in Phoenix, Arizona. There's reasons for doing that. It's because it's easier, because the regulations out there. There needs to be a better approach, but it's a long way off.
What advice would you give to like a lot of listeners that are creating data companies, want to create data companies, like other people are trying to build data companies? Like, what advice would you give to them to build to try to get as fast as possible to something successful?
Yeah, I mean, there's this horrible saying that data's the new oil. You've got to know how to refine it. There's a lot of data out there.
Yeah.
You've got to show the use case. You've got to show the business case. You've got to show the value of that data. And you've got to ask yourself that you may have a clever source of data, but is there an alternative data set that could deliver 90% of the outcomes, but be more efficient or be cheaper? So the idea of this easy sort of easy way of building a data company and then finding buyers for that data. There's usually another data asset out there, and you need to be very clear about how your use cases differentiate so you can get the value needed for that data.
What if I was like a car racer or something like that? If I'm a car driver, could I use AI to help me cheat? Certainly, people could do that in chess or in poker or all these other types of things. Could you imagine a car racer using AI to help them cheat even today?
Well, I mean, cheating's the wrong word. I think racing companies know where to push regulations. So there's already you could already there were race cars that had predictive suspension, for example, dependent on the environment that the race car was in. So the idea of a car dynamically changing its characteristics based on the driver's input, based on the track, the speed, that's already out there.
Yeah.
And that's why the FIA, for example, have so many restrictions, so it is more analog than potentially it could be if the car companies were allowed to get away with it.
Okay, so like potentially, they are. I'm not as familiar with car racing, but you're saying like people are inspecting cars already for certain types of tech that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're limiting tech deployment to stop it, because it is possible. We are working with a suspension provider in the UK, and the data you can get out of suspension, there's not, you might think maybe there's one sensor that measures height, maybe there's another sensor that measures pressure. There's more than two sensors in these suspension arms already. Even if you take, I don't know, a seat, a typical seat might have 35 sensors in it. So there's huge amounts of sensors in vehicles, and the data is not yet being exploited to the full. And we've provided a platform that is making it much easier to have access to a broad array of sensor data, and to be able to generate use cases in our sandbox environment.
Why do you think these autonomous vehicles? Why do you think it is taking? Is it just like an incredibly hard problem, or is there some other reason why it has not yet fulfilled its promise? Well, look, I own a Tesla, and just I know there's this auto driving, and it kind of works, but you really do have to pay quite attention. And it works like 95% of the time, but there's still plenty of time in any drive where it doesn't really work.
Well, look at Argo. What they spent 2.7 billion before they were shut down last week. Look at the costs being incurred by the other established AV providers. Each AV has got their own approach to doing an AV deployment, which requires huge amounts of capex.
Yeah,
and not yet solved the issue. I think Tesla spent $10 billion before they got to break even. That's less than the combined AV spend of all the other providers who are still doing modest trials in a few cities in the US. It's a tough question, and the biggest challenges is that they're all recreating their own unique data asset. There needs to be a better approach. There needs to be more of a cooperative where data outcomes are shared.
It does seem to me that having autonomous planes or autonomous boats seems to me a much easier problem, because you're just less likely to run into things than autonomous cars. But there still aren't fully autonomous planes, or very few of them, or fully autonomous boats. What is the why are we not seeing other modes of transportation?
I mean, you're seeing autonomous agricultural machinery is now starting to take off.
Okay, yeah, good point. That's a good point.
You're seeing planes that are fly by wire, and there is more sort of autonomy in planes. Boats. Autopilot is a big thing for boats already. So the idea, now they're not autonomous. They're not designed to avoid hazards. But there's a big data conundrum every time. The only now is there enough sort of horsepower that you can cheaply enough have within the vehicle or the environment to be able to process the data and identify the outcomes quick enough.
Now you have a really cool personal story. You never went to college, got your first full-time job as a IT director when you're 18 years old. Like, how important do you think college is for people?
For most people, college is very important, but it depends on the individual, doesn't it? It depends on the passion of the individual. I didn't just become IT director when I was 18. I'd been writing for computer magazines since I was 13. I'd already built a network of contacts when I was still in school in the computing industry. So I built my own platform to meet interesting players in industry, which then led to me becoming IT director. So I create my own path as opposed to going to college. For most people, college gives grounding, gives responsibility. I think it's good for most people, but for others, if you can, it certainly is an answer for you to, I did terrible at school. It isn't the answer to do terrible at school and think you can just go and get a job. There's that's like that's the story that people like to believe. But
yep.
I built a platform before I started building it when I was 13.
Okay, cool. All right. Last question we ask all of our guests: what conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
Wow. Don't look at your competition.
Don't look at your competition is the advice. And you say that's not good advice.
Oh, sorry. No, I meant the other way around.
Oh, okay.
People say it's bad advice. Look at your competition. I think you should always look at your competition. I think you should always look at how they're doing and do better.
So how should companies start thinking about that? Because you're right. A lot of people say don't look at your competition, just focus on your own product and stuff like that.
I think the OEM should look at Tesla, and I don't think they should, as an example of a successful AV deployment.
Don't you think they are? Like, every time I talk to an OEM, they're always talking about Tesla. That's the number one. That's always the thing that comes up and stuff.
But they don't want to commit to the regulatory risks that Tesla have had to go through, for example. And they need to ask themselves, if they're not going to go through the regulatory risks that Tesla have gone through, then maybe they're never going to get there. And but yeah, that's my.
Okay, I like it. That's really good. All right. Well, thank you, Richard Barlow, for joining us for World of DaaS. I follow you at Richard Wejo on Twitter. I encourage listeners to interact with you there. This has been really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.